that the president is saying that the broad-based government is God-sent. And now we can see also on the other side that there's a threat because of the police brutality, that it could create a wide chasm between the Kenya Kwanza government and also the ODM in this particular broad-based government. So what really came up to your mind as well when you heard that this is a God-sent government? This broad-based government is God-sent.
I think, I don't want to speak on behalf of God. Maybe Dr. Yam might want to comment on that particular matter.
We'll come to you, yes.
But on a more serious note, I think ODM and the Kenya Kwanza government need to soul search. And building on the same sentiments that Professor Ogola has put on the table there, I look at the people running government and I look at the behavior of these people, and you wonder whether these people understand in a very fundamental way what the state is, the role of the state in relation to violence, the role of the state and the impact of the state, on these other violent actors. In fact, let me call them non-state violent merchants, if you can call it that way. Political economy theory, and not just theory, state is actually established through monopoly of violence.
Yes.
We see that in countries where people are fighting for power. The one that dominates eventually takes over. We see this in situations of coup, but ironically, it is exactly the same situation in a democracy. The role of the state normally is to monopolize violence, to ensure that nobody exercises violence but the state. But now when you come to democratic states, you cannot go every day, caning people and expect that they'll work and you generate taxes. So again, as Professor was saying there, what does the state then do? So in democratic states, what you do is that you ensure that you exercise your monopoly of violence through a social contract. So basically, the violence is put behind the scenes and a whole lot of plethora of systems are put in place, starting with the constitution, starting with the rule of law, starting with regulation of those who can exercise violence, like police and others, ensuring that nobody else outside of the state exercise violence. I'll come back to this thesis, but as I conclude my opening remarks, when you find other actors exercising violence, it is a very dangerous sign of lack of control or weak state or even collapse of state. And we see this everywhere. If you're seeing the situation in Haiti, what's happening there? It's that the state has lost its monopoly of violence to gangs. We see this in Somalia, where warlords were able to actually in fact control violence at the expense of the state. So I find it stupid, dangerous, suicidal, that anybody who has been given the chance and the space to exercise state power would fathom and even tolerate others outside of the state exercising that power, because it erodes their own legitimacy. In fact, we can take this thing simply that, goons were escorting police, and the police were doing things there. So in the first instance, when we start from there, we are actually undermining the state, because we're not sure how far this will go to the extent that it can actually challenge the authority of the state. Secondly, those in the state, all of them, from the military to the police to general service, everybody, to watchmen, anybody in the state that has some responsibility, in terms of control of violence, in a democratic system, are controlled quite carefully what they can do. That's why, again, we have a plethora of laws that tell you how the police command works, what a policeman can do and what they cannot do, and what other people can do and what they cannot do. So again, when you have the agents of state acting outside of the law, my thesis is that they are actually eroding and challenging the authority of the state. In fact, for me, these I would call them seeds. Of course, if I can use that terminology. This is basically defiance of the state as far as I'm concerned. When a policeman can loot, that's defiance of the state. When a policeman can shoot a civilian against the law, that's defiance of the state. When a policeman can kill somebody in custody, that's defiance of the state. So the bigger picture and the message I want to send to the political class is that do not try, number one, to exercise violence out of the law. It is against your own interest. Because once other characters get into that space and you're not able to control them, your own legitimacy as a state is a threat. But I don't think this is what politicians, I don't think politicians see this, because what we normally do as Kenyan politicians, these guys are used to funding violence. We're crying here in 2008 when the Kenyan state was actually collapsing and we had to ask for salvation. What happened? What actually happened was that violence was being exercised out of the state. It was as simple as that. That is all that happened there. So that the Kenyan state could not control this violence. And ironically, some of the people who are implicated in this violence was our current president, who should know better.